So this deep dive is going to be a tough one. We've got a listener who's facing a really, really tough situation.
Yeah.
It's about family secrets and whether to reveal them.
Yeah, definitely a heavy one.
It's a 30-year-old who is now raising their two younger brothers, 8 and 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
And the reason they're raising them is because of some serious issues with the parents.
I see.
We're talking about a father who is a pedophile, a mother battling addiction. And to make matters even worse, they lost their sister to suicide back in 2023.
That's a lot to deal with.
It's a lot. So the big question that this listener is grappling with is how much to tell these young boys about their family history.
Right. How much truth is too much?
Exactly. And how do you even begin to have those conversations?
It's a classic dilemma. It's that innocence versus knowledge question. And we're seeing both sides of that argument reflected in the comments on this Reddit post.
Yeah.
You know, some people are really adamant about full disclosure.
Right.
They believe that the truth, even if it's painful, is ultimately empowering.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, there are a lot of commenters who are urging caution.
of course.
They're worried about the potential harm of, just dropping these bombshells on kids who might not be ready to process it all.
Right. They're still so young.
So young, how do you equip them for the world without shattering their, sense of security and safety?
One commenter, Merkanakai, I think, had a really interesting way of putting it, talking about concentric circles of understanding.
Concentric circles.
Yeah, it's like, you don't give an 8-year-old a complex physics textbook and expect them to grasp it, right?
Right.
You start with those basic building blocks and you gradually expand their knowledge as they grow and mature.
Okay, so I like that analogy.
Mm.
But how do we apply that to this specific situation?
Right.
How would you start explaining something like the father's pedophilia to, say, an 8-year-old?
Well, you have to be really thoughtful about using age-appropriate language and concepts. So instead of using a term like pedophile, which might be scary and confusing, you could start by saying something like, Dad made some choices that hurt other people, and that's why it's not safe for you to be around him right now.
So acknowledging the truth,
Yeah,
but without going into all the details that they may not be ready for.
exactly. And then as they get older, you can add more context, layer by layer, gauging their reactions, making sure they feel safe to ask questions along the way.
Okay, so it's about meeting them where they are,
Right.
both developmentally and emotionally.
Exactly. Not overwhelming them with more than they can handle at that moment.
Now, another thing that came up a lot in the comments, and I think this is a really important point, was the issue of safety, especially in regards to the father.
Right.
People were really urging the listener to take concrete steps to protect the boys.
Like legal steps.
Yeah, like seeking full custody and getting protective orders. Why is that so crucial in a situation like this?
Because unfortunately, knowledge doesn't always equal safety. You can tell a child that something is dangerous, but you also need to put those physical and legal safeguards in place to really minimize the risk of harm.
Right.
And in this case, given the father's history, those protective orders are absolutely essential.
I think a lot of people, underestimate the power of the legal system.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just paperwork.
It's about creating that tangible barrier.
Exactly. It's a barrier of protection.
Right. And it also sends that really clear message.
Yeah.
That the children's well-being is the absolute priority.
And it gives you legal recourse if those boundaries are crossed. Now, shifting gears a little bit, there was a comment from No Occasion 80 or 91 that I found particularly insightful. They pointed out that children often sense more than we realize.
Mhm.
Like they can pick up on these unspoken tensions and anxieties even if they don't have all the pieces of the puzzle.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
I think that's a really crucial point. Kids are so perceptive. They're like little sponges, absorbing the emotional climate around them.
Yeah.
So even if you're trying to shield them from certain information, they might already be picking up on the fact that something just isn't right.
So even if you choose not to disclose everything right now, it's still important to create an environment where they feel safe to talk about whatever it is they are picking up on.
Absolutely. Validate their feelings. Even if you're not ready to reveal all the details, it's about saying, I see you, I hear you, and I'm here for you no matter what.
And as we're talking about all of this, listener, it's really important to remember that you're not alone in this. There are resources out there to help you navigate these challenges, and we'll talk more about those a bit later. But for now, let's shift our focus to the emotional fallout. Even if you approach these conversations with the utmost sensitivity, there's bound to be some emotional impact on the boys as they start to learn more about their family history.
Of course. It's inevitable. I mean, it would be naive to think there wouldn't be any impact, right?
Right.
We're talking about their whole understanding of their family, their parents, maybe even themselves. It's bound to bring up a whole lot of really complex emotions.
So, like, what kind of emotional challenges do you think the boys might face, as they start to piece together this truth about their family?
Well, I think anger is a natural response, right?
Yeah.
They might feel angry at their parents for all the hurt that's been caused, or angry at the situation in general,
Hmm.
and maybe even angry at you, the listener, for keeping the truth from them for so long.
Even if it was done with the best intentions.
Exactly, even if it was to protect them.
Hmm.
And I think along with the anger, there's going to be a lot of confusion, especially for the 8-year-old.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I mean, trying to make sense of adult concepts like addiction and pedophilia, it's got to be so difficult for a child to wrap their head around.
Absolutely. And it's not just about understanding the concepts themselves. It's about grappling with what those concepts actually mean for them and their lives.
Right, right. Like, what does it mean for their family, their childhood, their own sense of security?
Exactly. And then there's the guilt.
Guilt, yeah, that's a big one.
Kids often blame themselves when things go wrong in a family. They think, if I had been a better kid, maybe mom wouldn't have started using drugs. Or maybe if I hadn't done this or that, dad wouldn't have done what he did.
Oh, yeah, that's so common.
And so damaging to their self-esteem. It's really crucial to emphasize that none of this is their fault.
So important.
That their parents' choices are a reflection of their own struggles, not a reflection of the children's worthiness of love and care.
So it's not just about explaining the what, but also the why.
Yes, exactly. And making sure they understand that they are not to blame for the adults' actions. And that's where, creating that safe and open space for dialogue is so important. It's not about forcing these conversations, but about letting them know they can come to you with any questions or feelings they have, no matter what, without judgment.
Okay, that sounds good in theory.
Yeah.
But how do you actually start those conversations? Like, what's a good starting point?
Well, it might sound simple, but sometimes just saying something like, hey, is there anything you've been wondering about? Anything feeling confusing or maybe even scary lately? Can be enough to open the door. It just shows them you're present, you're listening, and you're willing to talk about the tough stuff.
Okay, and if they start asking questions, how do you respond in a way that's honest but also age appropriate? We talked earlier about that gradual disclosure, right? Starting with basic explanations and then adding more detail over time. But how do you actually put that into practice?
Well, think of it like storytelling. You're not giving a lecture, right? You're weaving a narrative that they can understand, that they can process at their own pace. Use simple language, relatable metaphors, and pay attention to their cues. If you see them getting overwhelmed, pull back a little bit, reassure them that it's okay to take a break.
So, for example, with the father's situation, you might start with something like, Dad was sick, and his sickness made him do things that hurt other people, and that's why it's not safe for you to be around him.
Exactly.
And then as they get older, you can gradually fill in more details about what that sickness really means.
Right. You're acknowledging the truth, but you're not overwhelming them with information that's too disturbing or too confusing for their age.
And of course, we can't forget about the sister's suicide. I mean, that adds another whole layer of complexity. How do you even begin to talk about that with young children?
That's definitely a conversation that requires, immense sensitivity and care. I think the first step is to address their grief and loss in a way that validates their feelings.
Yeah.
Let them know that it's okay to feel sad, angry, confused, maybe even relieved. There's no right or wrong way to grieve.
I think we as adults sometimes try to fix children's sadness, and that can actually backfire. It's more about just holding space for their emotions.
Right. Letting them know that their feelings are valid and that you're there to support them no matter what.
And you can explain their sister's death in a way that's honest, but also gentle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you might say something like, your sister was very sick, and her sickness made her feel so sad and hopeless that she couldn't see any other way out.
But it's important to avoid language that makes it sound like she chose to die or that she was weak or selfish.
Exactly. We want to frame mental illness as a real and serious condition, just like any other physical illness. And while there's treatment and hope for recovery, sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, it can be really hard to overcome.
Now, this might also be a good time to bring up the idea of professional support, like a grief counselor or a therapist who specializes in working with children.
Absolutely. Having that outside support can be so valuable.
It gives them a safe and structured space to process their emotions, to learn those healthy coping mechanisms. And it's not just for the boys.
Right.
You too, listener. You need support.
Of course.
This is an incredibly heavy burden to carry. You need to take care of yourself.
Self-care is not selfish. It's essential.
It is, and it will ultimately allow you to show up more fully for your brothers. Now, I want to dive a little deeper into the legal aspects. We touched on the importance of seeking full custody and protective orders earlier. What are the practical steps the listener can take to secure that protection? I think sometimes the legal system can feel really intimidating and overwhelming.
It can be. It absolutely can. But the first step is really straightforward. It's just consult with an attorney. Find someone who specializes in family law and child protection.
Okay.
Someone who can look at the specifics of your situation and guide you through the process.
And don't be afraid to shop around, right?
Right, right.
A lot of attorneys offer free consultations.
They do.
Or they work on a sliding scale.
Yeah.
So cost shouldn't be a barrier to getting that legal advice.
Exactly. It's an investment in your brother's safety.
It is. And there are often resources to help make it happen. So once you've found an attorney that you trust, they can help you gather the necessary documentation, file for custody, and petition for those protective orders.
So what kind of documentation are we talking about here? What does the listener need to put together?
Well, you'll want to have documentation of the father's criminal history, any evidence of the mother's addiction, and really any instances of neglect or abuse that you've witnessed. Police reports, medical records, even your own personal journal entries can all be really helpful.
And don't be afraid to reach out to those support organizations. There are groups out there that specialize in child protection, and they can provide a lot of valuable information, resources, maybe even advocacy services to help you navigate all of this.
It's a reminder that you don't have to do this alone. Right, right. There's a whole network of people and organizations out there that are dedicated to helping families in crisis. And it's important to remember, this whole legal process isn't about punishing the parents. It's about protecting the children.
Absolutely. It's about putting their needs first and creating that safe and stable environment where they can really thrive, both physically and emotionally.
So it can feel really overwhelming, right? Just the enormity of the situation. But it sounds like there are concrete steps the listener can take.
There are.
Both in terms of having those difficult conversations with the boys and in terms of securing that legal protection.
It's not an easy road, but it's a necessary one. And by approaching it with compassion, honesty, and a commitment to getting support, the listener can create a path forward, both for themselves and for their brothers.
And remember, even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. We're here to support you on this journey, and we believe in your strength and resilience. And we've talked a lot about the immediate challenges, but I want to shift gears a little bit and think about the long term. What are some of the potential impacts, the lasting effects that these experiences could have on the boys as they grow up?
It's hard not to, right? I mean, these kind of things, these experiences, they're bound to shape who they become in ways we can't even fully predict.
It really is. It makes you wonder, how can they not be affected by all of this, right?
Trauma leaves its mark, especially at such a young age. But it's not always a simple equation, It's not like this happens, so therefore this will be the outcome. There's so much more to it.
Yeah.
Their personalities, their support systems, the resources they have access to, it all plays a role.
So what should the listener be looking out for? What are some signs that the boys might be struggling?
Well, it can show up in lots of different ways. Sometimes it's not even that obvious. Behaviorally, you might see changes in their sleep patterns, their eating habits.
Okay.
Maybe their school performance starts to slip. They might become more withdrawn or anxious, or maybe they start acting out, with anger or aggression.
It's almost like their behavior becomes a language of its own.
Exactly, trying to communicate something they don't have the words for.
And emotionally, what should we be looking for?
Emotionally, you might see them wrestling with feelings of guilt or shame, maybe low self-esteem. They might have trouble trusting people or forming healthy relationships.
It's like they're always bracing themselves for the next bad thing to happen.
Right, like they're always on guard.
And you mentioned earlier the possibility of long-term mental health challenges. Is that something the listener should be prepared for?
Unfortunately, yes. Childhood trauma can increase the risk of developing things like depression, anxiety disorders, even PTSD. It's not a certainty, of course, but it is a possibility.
So early intervention is key, right? The sooner you address these issues, the better the chances of preventing those long-term impacts.
Absolutely. Therapy can be a game changer.
Mm.
It provides that safe and confidential space for them to work through their experiences, develop those coping mechanisms, and start building resilience. And remember, therapy isn't just about fixing problems, you know?
Right.
It's about giving them the tools they need to navigate the challenges that life throws their way.
And it's not just about professional help either, right? Creating that supportive and loving environment at home is crucial as well.
100%. Stability, consistency, unconditional love, those are the foundations of healing. It's about showing them every single day that they are valued, they are safe, and that they can count on you no matter what.
It sounds like you're talking about more than just meeting their basic needs. It's about creating this emotional sanctuary, a place where they truly feel seen and heard.
That's it, exactly. And remember, healing from trauma, it's not a linear process.
Mm.
There will be good days and bad days, setbacks, breakthroughs. It's a journey.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that. We tend to want these quick fixes, but healing takes time.
It does. It takes time. It takes patience, and it takes ongoing support. You know, as we've been talking about all of this, I keep thinking about this listener. To step up and take on the responsibility of raising their brothers under these circumstances.
Wow.
That's strength. That's resilience.
It really is. And it's easy to get caught up in all the tragic elements of this story.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't overlook that, this incredible act of love and sacrifice.
Mm.
It really speaks volumes about this listener's character.
It does. It's a powerful reminder that even when faced with incredible adversity, the human spirit can shine through. There's always hope.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I think that's the perfect note to end on. This deep dive, it's been heavy, yes, but it's also been a reminder of the complexities of family, the power of love, and the importance of seeking support. To our listener, we want to say, you are not alone. There are people and resources out there to help you and your brothers on this journey. And above all, please be kind to yourself. You're doing an amazing job.
And if this deep dive has been helpful, or if it's sparked any questions for you, we invite you to join the conversation over on our main podcast, Voices of the Soul.
Yes, and don't forget to check out our YouTube channel as well. Search for Shauna Pelage and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future deep dives.
We're building a community of support, and we want you to be a part of it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves and each other.